Keith Haring is an American artist during the pop art movement. After a brief period studying at the Ivy School of Art in Pittsburgh, Haring moved to New York City in 1978 to attend the School of Visual Arts. With fellow artists Kenny Scharf and Jean-Michel Basquiat, Haring immersed himself in the punk clubs and street art scene of New York. In 1981 he began drawing graffiti, unauthorized chalk drawings on blank black advertising panels, in the New York subways. These would eventually number in the thousands, and they quickly created a popular following for his lively figural and patterned imagery and his cheekily outlaw activity. Haring shared few of the tagging tactics of urban graffitists, being drawn instead to the possibilities of a new public and vernacular kind of signage. He began making large outdoor murals, eventually executing them in Rio de Janeiro, Berlin, Melbourne, Chicago, Atlanta, and elsewhere, often assisted by scores of children. Haring's ebullient personality, infectious sense of play, and universally understood hieroglyphic style brought him attention from the mainstream press and transferred easily into his work in music videos and fashion design. In 1986 Haring opened a store called The Pop Shop in New York City, where he marketed products that ranged from t-shirts and pin-on buttons to original prints. He opened a Tokyo branch of the shop in 1988. Haring was socially conscious, and his murals often reflected his position on social issues. He sought to raise awareness of AIDS and fought against the proliferation of illegal drugs. He died of complications of AIDS at age 31.
Salvador Dali biography. Salvador Domingo Felipe Jacinto Dali I Dominic was born on the 11th of May 1904 in Figueres, Spain, and even from a very young age, he was destined to become one of the most prolific artists of all time. The striking and somewhat bizarre images depicted in his paintings solidified his name in the Surrealist movement, and his artwork is still revered by many acclaimed art critics to this day. Dali spent his childhood between Figueres and the family summer home in the coastal fishing village of Cadaqués, both of which were to feature prominently in his artwork. His brother, who died 9 months before Dali was born from gastroenteritis and also named Salvador, also featured in his paintings. His parents encouraged his talent and even built him his first art studio in Cadaqués, where he spent a great deal of time producing impressive charcoal drawings. In 1919, his first art exhibition was held in the Municipal Theatre of Figueres. Following the death of his mother to breast cancer in 1921, he attended the Academia de San Fernando in Madrid, where he was heavily influenced by several different artistic movements such as metaphysics and cubism. It wasn't long before his talent as an artist and his flamboyant, eccentric ways gained a great deal of attention. After being expelled from school for being disruptive and egotistical, Dali took several trips to Paris where he met renowned intellectuals and painters such as Pablo Picasso and Joan Miro, the latter of whom introduced him to the Surrealist movement. From 1929 onwards, Dali produced many Surrealist paintings that are often described as collages of his dreams and subconscious thoughts. This world-renowned painting, often called the Soft Watches or the Melting Clocks, was a clear example of Dali's unique talent as an artist. The artist would collaborate regularly with other members of the Surrealist movement, but their opinions would regularly clash, both on artistic matters but also around political views. He was not someone who could tailor his opinions or discipline himself to avoid these confrontations, and perhaps secretly even enjoyed causing controversy, just as he would write across the rest of his life, from when he was a child and excluded from school to his latter years as an artist. As well as his talent for painting, he was recognized as being eccentric, wearing odd clothing and sporting a flamboyant mustache influenced by one of his heroes, the Spanish master painter Diego Velázquez. His controversial behavior started to overshadow his magnificent talent as an artist, and the critics became more concerned with his acts of nonconformity than his artwork. In 1934, a trial was held and Dali was expelled from the Surrealist group. Despite his expulsion, he continued to produce highly rated Surrealist paintings such as Swans Reflecting Elephants and Metamorphosis of Narcissus, both of which were completed in 1937. He participated in surrealist art exhibitions into the 1940s. While World War II enveloped Europe, Dali continued to produce breathtaking pieces of art, and in 1941, he had his own exhibition in the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art in New York. There has been a huge amount said by a variety of sources over the years regarding Dali, and it is very helpful to have this authorized account of his life with which to compare these other, unconfirmed opinions. After returning home in 1948 with his wife, Dali spent the next 15 years creating 19 large canvases that incorporated optical illusions, geometry and surrealist images. Between 1960 and 1974, Dali helped to build the Teatro Museo in Figueres, where many of his paintings can still be seen today. Confined to a wheelchair following a house fire, Dali lived out his last few years in relative seclusion. Physical disabilities have challenged even the most significant artists, remembering how Matisse worked on his cutouts in his later year. Dali would continue to do whatever he could as his health slowly deteriorated in the 1980s. Having been fitted for a pacemaker in 1986, Dali could not shake off his heart problems and was hospitalized again in 1988. He would eventually die in 1989 of heart failure and respiratory problems. In a fitting gesture, he remains buried in the crypt below his theater museum in Figueres and continues to attract followers to the site even today. After his international impact over so many years, it is charming to find him now lying just a few hundred meters from his original family home, as well as just across the road from where he received his baptism and First Communion.
Andy Warhol was born Andrew Warhol Jr. His works explore the relationship between artistic expression, advertising, and celebrity culture that flourished by the 1960s, and span a variety of media, including painting, silk screening, photography, film, and sculpture. Some of his best-known works include the silk screen paintings Campbell's Soup Cans, 1962, and Marilyn Diptych, 1962, the experimental films Empire, 1964, and Chelsea Girls, 1966, and the multimedia events known as The Exploding Plastic Inevitable, 1966-67. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, Warhol initially pursued a successful career as a commercial illustrator. After exhibiting his work in several galleries in the late 1950s, he became recognized as an influential and controversial artist. His New York studio, The Factory, became a well-known gathering place that brought together distinguished intellectuals, drag queens, playwrights, bohemian street people, Hollywood celebrities, and wealthy patrons. He promoted a collection of personalities known as Warhol Superstars, and is credited with inspiring the widely used expression 15 minutes of fame. In the late 1960s he managed and produced the experimental rock band The Velvet Underground and founded Interview magazine. He authored numerous books, including The Philosophy of Andy Warhol and Popism, The Warhol 60s. He lived openly as a gay man before the gay liberation movement. In June 1968, he was almost killed by radical feminist Valerie Solanas, who shot him inside his studio. After gallbladder surgery, Warhol died of cardiac arrhythmia in February 1987 at the age of 58 in New York City. Warhol has been the subject of numerous retrospective exhibitions, books, and feature and documentary films. The Andy Warhol Museum in his native city of Pittsburgh, which holds an extensive permanent collection of art and archives, is the largest museum in the United States dedicated to a single artist. Many of his creations are very collectible and highly valuable. In 2013, a 1963 serigraph titled Silver Car Crash, Double Disaster, sold for $105 million. In 2022, Shot Sage Blue Marilyn, 1964, sold for $195 million, which is the most expensive work of art sold at auction by an American artist.
Pablo Picasso biography. As a significant influence on 20th-century art, Pablo Picasso was an innovative artist who experimented and innovated during his 92-plus years on Earth. His work matured from the naturalism of his childhood through Cubism, Surrealism and beyond, shaping the direction of modern and contemporary art through the decades. Although he lived most of his adult years in France, Picasso was a Spaniard by birth. Don José Ruiz y Blasco began schooling his son in drawing and oil painting when the boy was 7, and he found the young Pablo to be an apartment pupil. Picasso attended the School of Fine Arts in Barcelona, where his father taught, at 13 years of age. In 1897, Picasso began his studies at Madrid's Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, which was Spain's top art academy at the time. Picasso attended only briefly, preferring to roam the art exhibits at the Prado, studying paintings of Rembrandt, Johannes Vermeer, El Greco, Francisco Goya, and Diego Velázquez. During this nascent period of Picasso's life, he painted portraits like his sister Lola's First Communion. The two lived in abject poverty, sometimes reduced to burning the artist's paintings to stay warm. The Picasso art period, known as the Blue Period, extended from 1901 to 1904. During this time, the artist painted primarily in shades of blue, with occasional touches of accent color. For example, the famous 1903 artwork, The Old Guitarist, features a guitar in warmer brown tones amid the blue hues. Due to their subdued tones, Picasso's Blue Period works are often perceived as unhappy. Historians attribute Picasso's Blue Period mainly to the artist's depression following a friend's suicide. Due to their subdued tones, Picasso's Blue Period works are often perceived as unhappy. Shades of pink and rose imbued Picasso's art with a warmer, less melancholy air than in his Blue Period paintings. He painted one of his best-selling works during the Rose Period, Boy with a Pipe. Elements of primitivism in the Rose Period paintings reflect experimentation with the Picasso art style. During his African art and primitivism period from 1907 to 1909, Picasso created one of his best-known and most controversial artworks, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Inspired by the angular African art he viewed in an exhibit at the Palais de Trocadero and by an African mask owned by Henri Matisse, Picasso's art reflected these influences during this period. From 1907 to 1912, the artist worked with fellow painter Georges Braque in creating the beginnings of the Cubist movement in art. His romantic partner of 7 years, Fernand Olivier, figured in many of the artist's Cubist works, including Head of a Woman, Fernand, 1909. Picasso's works continued in the Cubist vein, but the artist introduced a new art form, collage, into some of his creations. He also incorporated the human form into many Cubist paintings, such as Girl with a Mandolin, 1910, and Ma Jolie, 1911-12. Although several artists he knew left Paris to fight in World War I, Picasso spent the war years in his studio. Picasso then moved into a brief relationship with Gaby Depere Lespinus that lasted only a year. They had a son together 3 years later. The Picasso art period extending from 1919 to 1929 featured a significant shift in style. In the wake of his first visit to Italy and the conclusion of World War I, the artist's paintings, such as the watercolor Peasants Sleeping, 1919, reflected a restoration of order in art, and his neoclassical artworks offer a stark contrast to his Cubist paintings. However, as the French Surrealist movement gained traction in the mid-1920s, Picasso began to reprise his penchant for primitivism in such Surrealist-influenced paintings as Three Dancers, 1925. In 1927, the 46-year-old artist met Marie-Thérèse Walter, a 17-year-old girl from Spain. The two formed a relationship and Marie-Thérèse gave birth to Picasso's daughter Maya. They remained a couple until 1936, and she inspired the artist's Bollard Suite, which consists of 100 neoclassical etchings completed in 1937. During the 1930s, Picasso's works such as his well-known Guernica, a unique depiction of the Spanish Civil War, reflected the violence of wartime. The menacing Minotaur became a central symbol of his art, replacing the Harlequin of his earlier years. During World War II, Picasso remained in Paris under German occupation, enduring Gestapo harassment while he continued to create art. Some of the time, he wrote poetry, completing more than 300 works between 1939 and 1959. After Paris was liberated in 1944, Picasso began a new relationship with the much younger art student Françoise Gallot. In 1961, at the age of 79, the artist married his second and last wife, 27-year-old Jacqueline Roch. Picasso produced more than 70 portraits of her during the final 17 years he was alive. The resulting artworks were a mixture of his previous styles and included colorful paintings and copper etchings. Art experts later recognized the beginnings of Neo-Expressionism in Picasso's final works. As one of the greatest influences on the course of 20th-century art, Pablo Picasso often mixed various styles to create wholly new interpretations of what he saw. He died in 1973. He was a driving force in the development of Cubism, and he elevated collage to the level of fine art. Similarly, his continual quest for passion in his many romantic liaisons throughout his life inspired him to create innumerable paintings, sculptures and etchings.
Augusta Savage, 1892–1962. African-American sculptor, teacher, and advocate for black artists. Augusta Savage was born Augusta Christine Fell in Green Cove Springs, Florida on February 29, 1892, the child of Edward Fells, a laborer and Methodist minister, and Cornelia Murphy. After moving to Harlem in New York in 1921, Savage studied art at the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art, where she finished the 4-year program in 3 years. The sculpture was well received and she began sculpting busts of other African American leaders, including Marcus Garvey. Savage's bust of the Harlem Child, Yaman, 1929, brought her fame as an artist, and a scholarship to study at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière in Paris. Savage had first received a French scholarship in 1922, but the offer was rescinded when white Alabama students who had received similar grants refused to travel to France unless she was removed from the group. With a grant from the Carnegie Foundation, she founded in 1932 the Savage School of Arts, which was the largest program of free art classes in New York. In 1934, Savage became the first African American woman elected to the National Association of Women Painters and Sculptors. Using her appointment in 1936 as an assistant supervisor in the Federal Arts Project, a division of the Works Progress Administration or WPA, she fought for commissions for black artists and to have African American history included on public murals. Savage was the first director of the Harlem Community Arts Center, the most successful community center of the Federal Arts Project. After resigning from the WPA in 1939, she opened the Salon of Contemporary Negro Art in Harlem, which was America's first gallery for the exhibition and sale of works by African American artists. Works exhibited included those by Buford Delaney, James Lassane Wells, Lois Mailou Jones, and Richmond Barth. Savage became reclusive in the early 1940s, and died of cancer on March 26, 1962, after spending her last year with her daughter in New York. Georgia O'Keeffe was a significant figure in American art for 7 decades. Remarkably, she remained independent from shifting art trends and stayed true to her own vision, which was based on finding the essential, abstract forms in nature. With exceptionally keen powers of observation and great finesse with a paintbrush, she recorded subtle nuances of color, shape, and light that enlivened her paintings and attracted a wide audience. Her primary subjects were landscapes, flowers, and bones, explored in series over several years and even decades. Born in 1887 near Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, O'Keeffe received art training at the Art Institute of Chicago School, 1905, the Art Students League of New York, 1907–8, the University of Virginia, 1912, and Columbia University's Teachers College, New York, 1914–16. During this period, she produced a remarkable series of charcoal drawings that led her art, and her career, in a new direction. It was through these drawings that O'Keeffe came to the attention of the prominent photographer and New York gallery owner Alfred Stieglitz in January 1916. With his encouragement and promise of financial support, O'Keeffe abandoned teaching and arrived in New York in June 1918, to begin a career as an artist. From then until his death in 1946, Stieglitz vigorously promoted her work in 22 solo exhibitions and numerous group installations. During the 1920s, O'Keeffe painted a series of architectural pictures that dramatically depict the soaring skyscrapers and aerial views of New York City. But most often, she painted landscapes and botanical studies that were inspired by annual trips to the Stieglitz family's summer home in Lake George, New York. Toward the end of the decade, the strains of dealing with the New York art world, her growing boredom with Lake George, and her deteriorating relationship with Stieglitz took their toll on her physical and emotional health. It was a visit that had a lasting impact on her life, and an immediate effect on her work. Over the next 20 years, from 1929 to 1949, she made almost annual trips to New Mexico, staying up to 6 months there, painting in relative solitude, then returning to New York each winter to exhibit the new work at Stieglitz's gallery. There, O'Keeffe found new subjects to paint in the sun-bleached animal bones and the rugged mountains that dominate the terrain. Although the desert bones of New Mexico had initially sparked O'Keeffe's imagination, it was the region's majestic landscape, with its unusual geological formations, vivid colors, clarity of light, and exotic vegetation, that held her attention for more than 4 decades. Often she painted the rocks, cliffs, and mountains in dramatic close-up, just as she had done with her flower subjects. In more than 30 pictures between 1946 and 1960, Black Door with Red, Chrysler Museum of Art, Norfolk, Virginia, she reinvented the patio into an abstract arrangement of geometric shapes. Flying in airplanes inspired her last 2 major series, Aerial Views of Rivers, It Was Blue and Green, Whitney Museum of American Art, New York, and expansive paintings of the sky viewed from just above the clouds, Sky Above Clouds 4, Art Institute of Chicago. In both series, as well as in the later patio door pictures, O'Keeffe increased the size of her canvases, sometimes to mural proportions, reflecting perhaps her newly expanded view of the world. The 7 works in her Sky Above Clouds series, 1960–65, are the most dramatic of her later years. The last 2 decades of the artist's life were relatively unproductive as ill health and blindness hindered her ability to work. When she died in 1986 at age 98, her ashes were scattered over the New Mexico landscape she had loved for more than half a century. Her rich legacy of some 900 paintings has continued to attract subsequent generations of artists and art lovers who derive inspiration from these very American images.
Romare Bearden biography. Romare Howard Bearden was born on September 2, 1911, to Richard, Howard and Bessie Bearden in Charlotte, North Carolina, and died in New York City on March 12, 1988, at the age of 76. His life and art are marked by exceptional talent, encompassing a broad range of intellectual and scholarly interests, including music, performing arts, history, literature and world art. Romare Bearden began college at Lincoln University, transferred to Boston University and completed his studies at New York University, NYU, graduating with a degree in education. While at NYU, Bearden took extensive courses in art and was a lead cartoonist and then art editor for the monthly journal The Medley. Bearden published many journal covers during his university years and the first of numerous texts he would write on social and artistic issues. After joining the Harlem Artists Guild, Bearden embarked on his lifelong study of art, gathering inspiration from Western masters ranging from Duccio, Giotto and Dehouch to Cézanne, Picasso and Matisse. From the mid-1930s through 1960s, Bearden was a social worker with the New York City Department of Social Services, working on his art at night and on weekends. Bearden was a prolific artist whose works were exhibited during his lifetime throughout the United States and Europe. Among his many friends, Bearden had close associations with such distinguished artists, intellectuals and musicians as James Baldwin, Stuart Davis, Duke Ellington, Langston Hughes, Ralph Ellison, Joan Miro, George Grosz, Alvin Ailey and Jacob Lawrence. Bearden was also a respected writer and an eloquent spokesman on artistic and social issues of the day. Active in many arts organizations, in 1964 Bearden was appointed the first art director of the newly established Harlem Cultural Council, a prominent African-American advocacy group. He was involved in founding several important art venues, such as the Studio Museum in Harlem and the Sink Gallery. Bearden was also one of the founding members of the Black Academy of Arts and Letters in 1970 and was elected to the National Institute of Arts and Letters in 1972. Recognized as one of the most creative and original visual artists of the 20th century, Romare Bearden had a prolific and distinguished career. Among Bearden's numerous publications are, A History of African American Artists, from 1792 to the present, CO authored with Harry Henderson and published posthumously in 1993. Bearden's work is included in many important public collections including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston and the Studio Museum in Harlem, among others. He has had retrospectives at the Mint Museum of Art, 1980, the Detroit Institute of the Arts, 1986, as well as numerous posthumous retrospectives, including the Studio Museum in Harlem, 1991, and the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., 2003. He received the Mayor's Award of Honor for Art and Culture in New York City in 1984 and the National Medal of Arts, presented by President Ronald Reagan, in 1987.
Frida Kahlo biography. She is considered one of Mexico's greatest artists. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in Coyoacán, Mexico City, Mexico. Frida Kahlo has two older sisters and one younger sister. Her father encouraged her to do lots of sports to help her recover. At this school, she first met the famous Mexican muralist Diego Rivera for the first time. Frida Kahlo attended the renowned National Preparatory School in Mexico City in 1922. Rivera then worked on a mural called The Creation on the school campus. In the same year, Kahlo joined a gang of students who shared similar political and intellectual views. The bus collided with a streetcar, and Frida Kahlo was seriously injured. Her spine and pelvis are fractured and this accident left her in a great deal of physical and physiological pain. She was severely injured and had to stay in the Red Cross Hospital in Mexico City for several weeks. To kill time and alleviate the pain, she started painting and finished her first self-portrait the following year. Frida Kahlo once said, "I paint myself because I am often alone and I am the subject I know best." Frida Kahlo reconnected with Rivera in 1928. Frida and Diego Rivera married the following year despite her mother's objection. During their earlier years as a married couple, Frida had to move a lot based on Diego's work. In 1932, Kahlo added more realistic and surrealistic components in her painting style. In the painting titled Henry Ford Hospital, 1932, Frida Kahlo lied on a hospital bed naked and was surrounded with a few things floating around, which includes a fetus, a flower, a pelvis, a snail, all connected by veins. This painting was an expression of her feelings about her second miscarriage. In 1933, Kahlo was living in New York City with her husband Diego Rivera. Rivera tried to include Vladimir Lenin in the painting, who was a communist leader. Rockefeller stopped his work and that part was painted over. Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera's marriage is not a usual one. Diego had so many affairs, and one of them was with Kahlo's sister Cristina. Frida Kahlo was so sad, and she cut off her long hair to show her desperation for the betrayal. Kahlo also had a brief affair with Leon Trotsky when the couple stayed at her house. In 1938, Frida Kahlo became a friend of Romare Bearden, who is one of the primary figures of the Surrealism movement. She had an exhibition at New York City Gallery in the same year. She sold some of her paintings and got 2 commissions. The next year, 1939, Kahlo was invited by Romare Bearden and went to Paris. She and Rivera got divorced that year, and she painted one of her most famous paintings, the Two Fridas 1939. But soon, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera remarried in 1940. She lost her beloved father that year and continued to suffer from chronic health problems. Despite her personal challenges, her work continued to grow in popularity and was included in numerous group shows around this time. In the year of 1944, Frida Kahlo painted one of her most famous portraits, The Broken Column. In this painting, Frida expressed her physical challenges through her art. During that time, she had a few surgeries and had to wear special corsets to protect her back spine. That year she was diagnosed with gangrene in her right foot. She became bedridden for the next 9 months, had to stay in the hospital, and had several surgeries. But with great persistence, Frida Kahlo continued to work and paint. In the year of 1953, she had a solo exhibition in Mexico. About 1 week after her 47th birthday, Frida Kahlo died at her beloved Blue House. Frida Kahlo's fame has been growing since her death. Her Blue House was opened as a museum in the year of 1958. In 1983, Hayden Herrera published his book on her, a biography of Frida Kahlo, which drew more attention from the public to this great artist. In the year of 2002, a movie named Frida was released, starring Salma Hayek as Frida Kahlo and Alfred Molina as Diego Rivera.
Vincent van Gogh biography. Vincent van Gogh was born on the 30th of March 1853 in Zundert, a village in the southern province of North Brabant. Van Gogh received a fragmentary education. 1 year at the village school in Zundert, 2 years at a boarding school in Zevenbergen, and 18 months at a high school in Tilburg. His brother Theo was born on May 1, 1857. Theo's unfailing financial and emotional support allowed his brother to devote himself entirely to painting. In 1873, Goupils transferred Vincent to London, and 2 years later they moved him to Paris, where he lost all ambition to become an art dealer. Van Gogh then took a post as an assistant teacher in England, but, disappointed by the lack of prospects, returned to Holland at the end of the year. Van Gogh abandoned the lessons, and after brief training as an evangelist went to the Borinage coal mining region in the south of Belgium. Vincent, too, was at his wits' end, and after a long period of solitary soul-searching in the Borinage he decided to follow Theo's advice and become an artist. It was because of Theo's loyal support that Van Gogh later came to regard his oeuvre as the fruits of his brother's efforts on his behalf. A lengthy correspondence between the two brothers, which began in August 1872, would continue until the last days of Vincent's life. When Van Gogh decided to become an artist, no one, not even himself, suspected that he had extraordinary gifts. In order to prepare for his new career, Van Gogh went to Brussels to study at the academy, but left after only 9 months. In April 1881, Van Gogh went to live with his parents in Eden in North Brabant, where he set himself the task of learning how to draw. Van Gogh made a few paintings while in The Hague, but drawing was his main passion. In September 1883 he decided to break off the relationship with Cian and follow in the footsteps of artists like Van Roppert and Mauve by trying his luck in the picturesque eastern province of Drenthe, which was fairly inaccessible in those days. After 3 months, however, a lack of both drawing materials and models forced him to leave. He decided once again to move in with his parents, who were now living in the North Brabant village of Noonan, near Eindhoven. In Noonan, Van Gogh first began painting regularly, modeling himself chiefly on the French painter Jean-François Millet, who was famous throughout Europe for his scenes of the harsh life of peasants. Van Gogh set to work with an iron will, depicting the life of the villagers and humble workers. At the end of 1884 he began painting and drawing a major series of heads and work-roughened peasant hands in preparation for a large and complex figure piece that he was planning. In the summer of that year, he made a large number of drawings of the peasants working in the fields. In 1885, feeling the need for a proper artistic training, Van Gogh enrolled at the Academy in Antwerp. In early 1886 Van Gogh went to live with his brother in Paris. At last, he was confronted with the full impact of modern art, especially with the recent work of the Impressionists Claude Monet, Paul Cézanne, Édouard Manet, and post-impressionists Paul Gauguin. Within 2 years Van Gogh had come to terms with the latest development and had forged his own, highly personal style. At the beginning of 1888, Van Gogh, now a mature artist, went south to Arles in Provence, where he at last began to feel confident about his choice of career. It was typical of Van Gogh's faith in his own abilities that he decided not to try to sell any work yet but to wait until he had 30 top-class pictures with which he could announce himself to the world. He cherished the hope that a number of other artists would come and join him in Arles, where they could all live and work together. Van Gogh was unable to work when suffering from bouts of his illness. If he felt well enough, though, he went out to draw and paint in the garden or surroundings of the asylum. In the year's closing months, he succeeded when 2 of his paintings were shown at the 5th exhibition of Société des Artistes Indépendants. Van Gogh also made many translations in color of prints by some of his favorite artists, like Millet and Eugène Delacroix. In January 1890, the critic Albert Aurier published an enthusiastic article about Van Gogh's work. The artist left Saint-Rémy in May 1890 and went north again to the rustic village of Auvers-sur-Oise, near Paris. He nevertheless continued working hard during his 2 months in Auvers, producing dozens of paintings and drawings. On July 27, 1890, Vincent van Gogh was shot in the stomach and passed away in the early morning of July 29, 1890, in his room at the Auberge Revaux in the village of Auvers-sur-Oise. Theo, who had stored the bulk of Vincent's work in Paris, died 6 months later. His widow, Johanna van Gogh Bonger, returned to Holland with the collection, and dedicated herself to getting her brother-in-law the recognition he deserved. In 1914, with his fame assured, she published Vincent van Gogh's letters between the 2 brothers.
Jacob Lawrence is an American painter of the 20th century whose works, frequently done in series using tempera or gouache on paper or cardboard, portray scenes of black life and history with vivid, stylized realism. Lawrence was the son of Southern migrants. After his parents separated, he and his siblings were put into foster care, and after 3 years, they moved to the Harlem section of New York City to live with their mother. Lawrence attended free art classes at Utopia Children's House, where he showed a talent for creating lively decorative masks, a motif that would later figure strongly in his narrative painting. At the Harlem Art Workshop, sponsored by the Works Progress Administration, WPA, in 1932, he studied under Charles H. Alston. Through Alston, he met artists and writers associated with the Harlem Renaissance, including Augusta Savage, Aaron Douglas, Ralph Ellison, Langston Hughes, and Richard Wright. The abstract figures and flat primary colors that would become the hallmarks of Lawrence's style are already evident in his early works, which document life in Harlem. In the late 1930s he began several series of small-scale tempera paintings on black history, including 41 works on the life of Toussaint Louverture, 1938, leader of the Haitian independence movement, 32 pieces on Frederick Douglass, 1939, and 31 paintings on Harriet Tubman, 1940. Soon afterward, Lawrence received a grant from the Julius Rosenwald Fund. He started working on The Migration of the American Negro, a series of 60 paintings and accompanying captions that narrate the story of the Great Migration. The series was shown at the Downtown Gallery in New York City in 1941, bringing Lawrence recognition at 24. The series was shown at the Downtown Gallery in New York City in 1941, bringing Lawrence recognition at the age of 24. Lawrence thus became the first African-American artist represented in MoMA's Museum of Modern Art collection. That same year Lawrence married artist Gwendolyn Knight, whom he had met some years earlier while working for the WPA. After World War II, wherein he served in the U.S. Coast Guard, Lawrence joined the faculty at Black Mountain College in North Carolina at the invitation of Joseph Albers. In 1948 Lawrence received a commission from Hughes to illustrate his latest poetry collection, One Way Ticket. Lawrence obliged by creating a series of brush and ink works revisiting his migration series. In the 1960s, Lawrence made works on the civil rights movement, and he visited Nigeria in 1962, 1964, where he painted scenes of local life. He also continued to teach at various schools and colleges, including Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, 1956-70, and the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, 1968, an artist summer residency program in Maine. In 1971 he became a professor of art at the University of Washington in Seattle, from which he retired in 1986. Lawrence's later works included a powerful series on the struggles of desegregation as well as numerous commissioned pieces. He continued to paint until a few weeks before his death, from cancer, in 2000. Lawrence was awarded the National Medal of Arts by U.S. President George H.W. Bush in 1990. His work was shown frequently throughout his life at galleries and at major retrospectives. In addition to MoMA and the Phillips Collection, many other prominent American museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Seattle Art Museum, boast his work in their permanent collections. In the 21st century, Lawrence's forthright representations of the joys and sorrows of the African American experience continued to reverberate with audiences. Junwin Hatsushiba was born in Tokyo to a Vietnamese father and a Japanese mother. Growing up and being educated in Japan and the USA, he earned his BFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago in 1992 and then his MFA from the Maryland Institute, College of Art in 1994. For almost 20 years of working as a global artist, his works can be seen as the culmination of memorial projects. In 2001, with his first underwater film project, Memorial Project Nha Trang, Vietnam, Towards the Complex, for the Courageous, the Curious, and the Cowards, shown at the first Yokohama Triennial, the artist came into recognition in the international contemporary art world. Since then, he has been commissioned to create the second underwater film, Happy New Year, Memorial Project Vietnam 2, for the exhibition series Matrix at the University of California, Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive in 2003. He has continued to direct and film 2 other underwater films in the water of Japan with Memorial Project Minamata, Neither Either Nor Neither, A Love Story, a memorial for the Minamata disease patients, and Ho! 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 Merry Christmas, Battle of Easel Point, Memorial Project Okinawa, a monument of multinational history based in 1972 Okinawa, Japan, Vietnam, and USA. From 2004 to 2007 in Laos, he created a film on the Mekong River titled The Ground, the Root, and the Air, the Passing of the Bodhi Tree, bringing his filming experience above water. Also in 2007, he returned to producing installation works with the Globe Project, Garden of Globes commissioned for his solo museum show at Kunstmuseum Luzern in Switzerland. In that same exhibition, he began his ongoing project, And Breathing is Free, 12,756. Up to now, he has run approximately 1/4 of the total distance culminating through 17 different cities worldwide. His works are often generated from multiple landscapes of thoughts combining unlikely, sometimes surprising mixtures into the existing context of local history and issues. In his most recent film from 2013, The Master and the Slave, Inujima Monogatari, filmed at Inujima Island in Satochi, Japan, he attempts to survive Inujima's history with Japan's national sport of baseball played inside the last stone quarry of the island. Junwin Hatsushiba has exhibited in numerous international triennials and biennials, including Venice, Istanbul, Sao Paulo, Sydney, Shanghai, Yokohama, and Guangzhou. One can also find his works in public collections at Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris, Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in NY, Mori Art Museum in Tokyo, and many more museums, foundations, and private collections in the world.